Hi guys, and welcome to Lizzie Jean Makes. Today I am recording a mini series of videos about how to get started teaching yourself to become a web developer, and how to where to get started, what things you ought to find out, and pointing you to some resources and things online that you can use to learn how to become a web developer for free. This is not my usual type of content. I usually do frugal small space living, but I've had quite a few demands of this kind of information from friends and family, and I thought it'd be worth putting together a short mini series on this today, just giving a basic overview and the kind of things that you look for when hiring a web developer, that you would need to know in order to get your CV and your portfolio and your knowledge up to a standard where you could become employed as a web developer. So in this video I want to talk about writing reusable code, writing manageable, maintainable and scalable code, and some of the various techniques and tricks for being able to write code well as part of a larger team in a larger project. So the first thing that I want to talk about is the ability to use namespaces. So the reason that you need to use namespaces, particularly in JavaScript, but also in CSS selectors and IDs, classes in your HTML DOM, really anything within your project that can benefit from using namespaces. And the reason for using them is that if you use a third-party library, you don't want there to be the possibility that they have used a certain class, and anything that you've got with the same class name would clash. So you don't want introducing a third-party library to become a problem where you've got to sort of unpick everywhere that you use that class and give it a different class, and so that you don't conflict with this third-party library that you want to bring into use on your website. So using a namespace is essentially it gives your names and things a uniqueness that is not going to be clashing with any other third-party libraries that you could bring into play. So when you're dealing with selectors, classes, IDs for CSS or for JavaScript, there are a limited number of special characters that you can use within class names. So for example, you can use underscores in classes and IDs, and you can set the first word up to be the name of the company, for example, and then an underscore, and then whatever the word is that you were going to use as the class. That means that the name of the company is not going to be used by any other third party, so you know that name of your company underscore whatever you were going to call your class is always going to be unique and not going to cause a clash. So that's an example of using a namespace in classes and IDs. There are various things that you can't start classes and IDs with. You can't start classes and IDs with a number. It has to be a letter. That letter has to be lowercase, I believe. I'd have to remind myself. I can't even think off the top of my head what all the restrictions are, but there are various restrictions. So you would want to make sure that whatever namespace you chose, it complied with all those restrictions, and that the character that you use to delimit the namespace from the rest of your class and ID names was one that was not a reserved character. It was something that you were able to use within that context of a class or ID. So there are certain things that it's okay to use in HTML, but you can't use in CSS selectors, or you can't use in JavaScript selectors, and that's not going to work out for you. So you need to make sure that whatever you use is compatible across the board. When dealing with JavaScript particularly, if you're giving things variable names, you're declaring them on the scope. That can either be within the scope of your function or within the global scope of the whole page load, the whole DOM. So the sort of memory of that page while it's loaded in the browser. If you're declaring things on the global scope and other libraries are declaring things on the global scope, then all of your variable names, even temporary Scratch variables that you're only using to give it as a placeholder so that you can loop over it or something like this, they need to be unique if they're going to be on the global scope. They need to be things that are not going to compete with any other third-party variables that are also on the global scope. Even if you manage to sort of lock down your coding so that you're not putting things on the global scope, which is best practice if you're trying to write maintainable code, is to isolate it so that variables are only available within their specific scope of their specific function and not made available on the global scope. Even if you're doing that within a given function, you want to make sure that any variables that you're using are unique so that you don't have to worry that you've used that earlier up in the script. So understanding the scope of variables in JavaScript is important, and understanding how you can use namespaces to make sure that your variable names are unique and are not going to clash is also something that's well worth looking into. There are some great resources for how to write maintainable, scalable JavaScript, and there are some great courses. There's a really good video which I'll link to in the description below. There are also loads of books that are available on this topic that are well worth a read. It is one of the key concerns, I think, as a development team working on projects in a company that you think about, is the fact that you need to be able to bring in new things further down the line. New features are going to come up. You don't know where the future's going to take you. You don't know, what's going to come out on new browsers in 2 years' time. But the code that you're writing may well still be in use 5 years from now. And so you need to sort of future-proof things. And the best way of future-proofing things is to follow best practice when it comes to writing maintainable and scalable JavaScript. Another key part of writing scalable JavaScript is separating out modules. So rather than having one big JavaScript file, or rather than having big JavaScript functions, separating those down into smaller files and separating your functions out into smaller functions means that you can reuse parts of code. So for example, if you have got a function that checks through a string and replaces any spaces with %20, which is a URL encoded space, before churning it out, so that you've got a nice URL encoded string for whatever reason, but you're only focused on the spaces. That function is something that you might want to use from multiple parts of the code. So separating that out into a function with a given function name that describes what it is it's doing and calling that from all of those places means that if the way that URL encoded of spaces changes in the future, unlikely, but if it did, then there would be only one place that you would need to make that change, not in every single function that's doing that, because if you're just referring to this function by name, you just go into that function and change it, and all the functions that are referring to that are now pointing to the new updated code that does it the correct way. This is a big deal in terms of longevity of code, is when something comes up and you need to change something, or you decide actually we were using Solr to do our searching but now we're going to use Elasticsearch, so we need to do things a bit differently. If you've separated things out and you've got a specific module and specific reusable chunks of code that are referenced from everywhere else, you only need to change the one place where it's actually written, and all the other references are automatically pointing to good and updated code. So that's a really big sort of lesson to learn, and it's a great thing to talk about during an interview for a job in web development, is to be able to sit and chat a bit about some of the concerns that web development teams face and that projects face, and how you would go about writing code that is going to be easy to maintain and scale, add to in the future. It's a key thing that is going to make an employer choose you over somebody else. You might both have beautiful portfolio websites. You might both be able to say, yes, you know, I know about writing valid XHTML and I know about CSS3 and things. But the person who sits there and says, I'm going to make your life so much easier because I'm not going to write rubbish spaghetti code that's all over the place, that repeats the same actual function written out tons and tons of times in all different places, so that if you have to change that, you have to change it in like 20 different places. I'm not going to be that messy Tasmanian devil spinning around, whipping up a storm of rubbish in your code. I'm going to be that person that says, oh yeah, that's fine, I put it in the sock drawer, and just go and find the socks in the sock drawer where they were supposed to be. The nice, calm, ordered and structured developer is always going to be preferable to someone who's sort of a bit hit and miss. So being able to explain that you understand these concerns with working in a big team, you understand how to be a nice, polite coder within a large team, is going to make you the preferable candidate, because they're going to want to work with you because you're not going to cause them a headache every single time, because you've done things a slapdash quick and dirty way rather than a proper way that's actually going to be helpful in the future. So I think this is a key area to buff up on. It's a key area to include in your cover letter. It's a key theme to talk about on your portfolio website, on your CV, and it's definitely the big guns to bring out in a job interview where you're trying to get a job as a paid web coder for the first time. Being able to sort of explain these bigger considerations is going to swing it between you and an equally qualified candidate on paper, is the fact that you're going to make their life easier. They're going to want you on their team. They're going to want you to be the person that they're also writing code with, because your code is going to be easy to deal with. So, you know, it's just a win-win situation. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and be sure to check out the rest of the videos in this mini series. Thanks for watching, guys. Bye.